crowd on hand. I don't know the head count, but I'm going to say 40 to 45. 60? All right, 60 people here. All right, that's going to be a record, all right, for our history at noon. So we're thankful on this beautiful day, living on the St. Lawrence River. There's so many other things you could have done, but you're in the right place at the right time to learn a little bit about the Thousand Islands dressing. I am Tom LaClaire. I am the Clayton historian. I do the town and the village. I'm into my 4th year as the historian. And when they hired me, they said, we want you to oversee the History at Noon and the Hashing Over History program. So that's why I get the honor of being up here today. That's why over a year ago, I think I reached out and said, hey, would you be willing to do the program for our sesquicentennial series? I try to say it every month, but this program is brought to you by the Thousand Islands Museum, the Clayton Historian, the Sesquicentennial Committee, and the Clayton Opera House. We're all working together to bring you these wonderful programs where you, whether you live in Clayton, whether you live outside of Clayton, learn more about our Clayton history on the 150th. All right. So today we have Andrea Reeves, we have Eric Roberts. And they've been doing this program, and I don't want to steal all their thunder because they're going to give you a little spiel. But I saw this program for the first time about 2 years ago, and they've done a wonderful job. So I'm going to quit talking. It's your program. Thank you for coming in from Syracuse to do this. Turn it over to you.
Thank you all for coming. I think you're in for a treat as far as actually learning the history of the true origin of Thousand Island dressing. For us, it's been a labor of love. We're a married couple, and we have the privilege of having a fun job where we've done kids shows, we've done different documentaries, we do TV commercials and so forth. And this was our first documentary, and it began here 11 years ago when we paid a visit to the Thousand Islands.
Right, we took a boat tour, on Uncle Sam's boat tours. I don't know if any of you have taken that, and we heard the story of George Bolt's chef, Oscar, preparing a concoction because they didn't have the ingredients to make a dressing and so forth. And then we came here to Clayton to check out the town, and we had lunch at the Thousand Islands Inn. And imagine our surprise when on the back of the menu there was a conflicting story about Sophia Lalonde and a fisherman's wife who came up with the dressing. And so we turned to each other, and that happens to be his favorite dressing. And so we thought, well, wouldn't that be a fun little documentary to make? And so upon investigation, we found another story about the Blackstone Hotel in Chicago with Chef Theo Rooms. And so we said, well, we're going to set upon finding out who actually invented the sauce.
Right. So that's what you're about to see. The exciting part for us was we went through it. One road led to another, and just the whole slew of people we met, which you'll see, just delightful. You can't make up,
You can't make
fiction. Truth is actually stranger than fiction. Just the people and the stories and where it led us and so forth. And at the very, very last minute, literally we were set to broadcast in a week. We thought we knew where it was all headed, but we found the definitive proof of which tied it all together. So we're going to show this now. Hopefully, it's no snafu when we press the play button.
And we changed culinary history forever.
Yeah, we have been featured on CBS Sunday Morning when they interviewed us for this. We also were on Mysteries at the Museum, where they had actors that played us, believe it or not.
You look nothing like us, by the way.
We didn't even know what was happening, and someone said, "Hey, we think that was you on TV." But yeah, it's been a real privilege and exciting, and so
we hope you enjoy it.
and we'll be available for Q&A after,
Right.
and we urge you to watch the credits at the end. When you think it's over, we did a Thousand Island dressing taste test at both Castle when we first started. There were 3 original recipes, so we lined them all up and had people trying to see what the favorite was. So they got people chattering.
It was during a wine festival.
Yeah, so they were. Yeah, so they're doing the dressing like shots. Anyway, here we go.
Travel with us now to one of the most beautiful places in the world, the fabulous Thousand Island, bordering northern New York and Canada, and the birthplace of Thousand Island dressers.
Or was it? We are about to examine the evidence to determine the mysterious origin of Thousand Island dressing. Thousand Island dressing is one of the most popular condiments in the world, and the legends of how this famous salad dressing was created at the turn of the 20th century are cloaked in intrigue. Tales of tragic love, fame and riches, working class ingenuity, shocking racism, and smoldering sensuality make this a tasty mystery to devour. Please join us now as we uncover the clues and seek to solve the mysterious origin of Thousand Island dressing. It's time to go back and examine the clues, evidence, and legends that surround the famous salad dressing's first appearance at the turn of the 20th century. Most believe that Thousand Island dressing was named for the region where it was created, the Thousand Islands, a breathtaking region of international beauty, so named because of the more than 1,000 islands that dot the shared pristine waterway of the St. Lawrence River between New York State and Ontario, Canada. But there is one legend that says the dressing was actually created in Chicago. In fact, for this one dressing, there are 3 legends. We're going to take a look at them all and the fascinating folklore that surrounds them. And in doing so, we may actually solve the mysterious origin of Thousand Island dressing. Legend number 1, George Bolt and Chef Oscar. Oscar Chersky, the ship's steward of the rich and famous George Bolt, created the unique sauce for the lunch guests aboard Bolt's yacht, Louise, while cruising the Thousand Islands. This same steward then rose to fame as the prominent chef Oscar of the Waldorf in New York City, which happened to be Bolt's hotel. Oscar, it is said, then went on to create other famous dishes such as the Waldorf salad, veal Oscar, and eggs Benedict. Alan Bennis, who owns the Thousand Island Inn in Clayton, New York, and claims the dressing was first served there in the early 1900s, has a different view.
Oscar did not create it, and it wasn't on George Bolt's boat. In fact, research on George Bolt indicates from a fellow who dedicated his life to the research that Oscar Shirky was never in the Thousand Islands, and in his entire life, he was scared to death of the water and hated boats.
George Bolt built the amazing Bolt Castle in the Thousand Islands for his wife Louise, reshaping the island it is constructed on into a heart and renaming it Heart Island to symbolize his love for her.
If you were to visit Bolt Castle, you'll see the stonework, the raw ironwork, the plasterwork. Hearts are a theme throughout the entire structure.
This love story ended tragically as Louise's own heart gave out before she could see the finished masterpiece in her honor. Today it stands as a testament to one man's love. And in the gift shop, bottles of legendary Thousand Island dressing are sold, with the story of Oscar and the yacht printed on the label. The mysterious origin of Thousand Island dressing. Legend number 2, Sophia Lalonde. In the early part of the 20th century, small inns with restaurants specializing in regional recipes were abundant in the Thousand Islands. Many offer dinners created from the bountiful catches of the St. Lawrence River and topped with unique sauces and condiments. One such inn was the Herald House. George Lalonde guided guests from the hotel to fish for black bass and northern pike through the scenic fish-filled waters of the Thousand Islands that would serve as their delicious shore dinners. His wife, Sophia, created a different and unusual salad dressing that received such rave reviews from the fishing parties that it was requested to be served in the Herald House's dining room by Mae Irwin, a prominent Broadway actress and star of the time, who published her own cookbook and had her own cooking column.
Grandma Sophia used to take in Mae Irwin's laundry from her place on Grindstone Island, and she did all her sheets and pillowcases. Grandpa, alone, took Mae Irwin fishing all the time and was her guide. So I believe that that's the connection where the recipe got into Mae Irwin's hands and allegedly given to Chef Oscar, Maitre d' Oscar of the Waldorf Astoria.
So who was Mae Irwin? She was notorious for the first ever cinematic smooch with actor John Rice in the 1896 Thomas Edison film, The Kiss. The film only lasted a few seconds, but it was considered scandalous at the time and publicly denounced by clergy. She was known for her ample bosom and flirty behavior. But perhaps by today's standards, most shocking is that part of Irwin's popularity was gained through the singing recording of coon songs, a form of entertainment that is difficult to listen to today, but very popular at the turn of the century. She bought an island in the Thousand Islands and traveled by rail from her home in New York City. So was it Mae Irwin that gave George Bolt the recipe for Thousand Island dressing? The mysterious origin of Thousand Island dressing. Legend number 3. Chef Theo Rooms, Chicago. The Theo Rooms story is featured and archived at the Chicago Culinary Museum, which has a program from the awards ceremony held in September 1925 at the Hotel Sherman's Grand Ballroom, where Chef Rooms was recognized for his contribution to American cuisine for creating Thousand Island dressing in 1910. Here is the account by Theo Rooms that is featured in that program.
It was 15 years ago that the Blackstone Hotel opened its doors to the public. I was then a chef at the Blackstone, and my contribution consisted of a new salad dressing. It found immediate favor with the hotel patrons and was in big demand. In honor of the hotel, it was called Blackstone Salad Dressing. Chefs and stewards of the other hotels heard of the dressing, and inquiries came in from all directions. At this particular time, I went on a vacation on the St. Lawrence River, visiting the Thousand Islands. Coming home, I discussed with the maitre d' at the hotel, Mr. Homewater, the success of the dressing, and in the course of my conversation, my visit to the Thousand Islands was mentioned. A sudden thought struck Mr. Homewater, and he exclaimed excitedly, the Thousand Island dressing was a good name for my new salad dressing.
There was a Chicago contingency of island residents here during that era, late 1880s, early 1900s. George Pullman, among the probably most notable from the Chicago area. So he certainly could have first been introduced to the Thousand Islands dressing here in the Thousand Islands, where it originated, and then thought an adaptation to the same recipe in this Chicago hotel would be a hit.
So which legend is correct? Our research tells us that none of them contain the complete story. So sit back and relax as we separate fact from fiction, and let's unravel together the mysterious origin of Thousand Island dressing. Three legends, three recipes. With three different legends, there are, of course, three different recipes claiming to be the very first version of Thousand Island dressing. Our research team was able to visit the chefs that prepare the different recipes daily for their dining customers. Just how similar are the ingredients? What do the different versions tell us about the history of our favorite condiment? We first visit with executive chef Eric Leibtag at the Blackstone Hotel in Chicago, where Theo Room's recipe lives on.
This is Chef Eric Leibtag at the Renaissance Blackstone Hotel in Chicago, showcasing Chef Theodore Room's original, super fantastic Thousand Island dressing. It's the first recipe ever created of Thousand Island dressing. Here at the Blackstone, we call it the Blackstone dressing, and we serve it with the Blackstone seasonal greens, which is an assortment of fresh, locally sourced greens, and that we make the dressing fresh in-house every day. It's a really popular item that we have here. Theodore Rooms was the first chef to ever create this recipe.
At the Waldorf Astoria in New York City, where Oscar's Restaurant of Today pays homage to the George Bolt and Oscar Chertsky legend, Executive Chef David Garcelat shares with us the historic recipe enjoyed by Waldorf patrons from around the world.
You know, what we like to see is a dressing that's not too thick, but it has a lot of texture in it. So that's, I'm told how it's got its name, that it kind of looks like a thousand islands floating in the St. Lawrence River. This is what's completely different about it. You can tell this is fresh made. It's you know, you've got the bright green herbs in there that, you know, they're very different than freeze dried herbs. Fresh chopped eggs, olives, gives it a lot of body. We're very proud of our rich heritage here at the Waldorf Astoria, and you know, it's been passed down to us from George Bolt and Oscar, and all the chefs in the kitchen are very proud of that. And you know, the famous dishes that were either invented here or made famous here, Thousand Island dressing serving one, but also eggs Benedict, a Waldorf salad, which continues to be one of our #1 side dishes in the hotel, B.O. Oscar. And that's all built on a heritage of general managers like George Bolt and Oscar Chertsky and all the chefs that worked here, and trying to continue that with these dishes, but also bring them into the modern era, the way that's suitable to today's palate, but still respect the integrity of the dish as much as we can.
The Sophia Milan recipe, which according to legend was created for Sophia's fishing guide husband George at the turn of the century, is served daily to the students at Cornell University by Sophia's great-grandson Murray, operations manager of Cornell Dining.
Currently, we do over 4,000 meals a day, and I probably serve 3 gallons to 4 gallons a day of just the dressing alone. The students put it on top of hamburgers, they put it on top of fish, they put it on top of noodles, they put it on top of everything. They just love it.
Michelle Wilbur, Cornell Dining nutritionist, proudly describes the Cornell approach to balanced nutrition at the university.
This is the largest salad bar that we have on campus. And you can see we have a lot of different toppings. The toppings always vary. The Thousand Island dressing is actually something that I talk to our students when they first come onto campus, but also because it's, again, scratch made. In any case, students are always asking me about dressings. They do want the typical low-fat, fat or fat-free dressings available. We do have the vinegars and olive oil, canola oil available if they want to do their own salad dressing. But the Thousand Island is something that I always encourage people to try because of the story, but you know, as a dietitian, I typically talk about the portion. So, you know, 1 or 2 tablespoons as opposed to the whole salad.
Portion control? Sorry, Michelle, but when you have a tasty offering like the Milan Thousand Island dressing, that might be a problem.
Oh, great grandma, you'll be very proud of that batch.
According to legend, the Lalande recipe so impressed famous actress Mae Irwin that she asked it to be served at the Herald House, now the Thousand Islands Inn in Clayton, New York, and was considered so valuable it was stored in a safe at the hotel, as described by Alan Bennis, current owner of the inn.
Well, when we bought the hotel, and about the only thing that was still here that wasn't then is the safe. And of course everyone likes to look through a safe, especially when you didn't look through it when you were looking at the place you bought. So I just opened up the safe, opened up the other door, and in there was a piece of paper. And it listed ingredients. And I wondered, what was this? And we showed it to one of our cooks out in the kitchen, and she said, it looks to me like Thousand Island dressing. And we went with it from there, and we've been using it ever since. It was on a piece of paper that was old then. And we copied it, and the one we have that we're using now is old now.
Mayonnaise? mayonnaise, hard-boiled egg, ketchup, chili sauce, green peppers and pickles, fresh lemon. Although each of the chefs will not reveal their exact recipes, it is obvious that with so many shared ingredients, each of the 3 legendary recipes could not have independently been created. So there must be a common thread that ties New York City, the riverside town of Clayton in the Thousand Islands, and Chicago, Illinois together, to explain how the dressing with the same ingredients appeared in 3 different locations in the early 1900s. Roger Lucas, famed historian on the life of George Bolt, explains more.
There were 16 trains a day pulling into the village of Clayton, New York. Fast trains out of New York City up along the Hudson River. These fast trains would come and bring patrons to the Thousand Island Club so they could get up and party on the weekends. It was an area that was very pure, very clean, away from the smoke and the dust of the city life, though they would come to the Thousand Islands for the coolness of the breezes along the beautiful St. Lawrence River. Many wealthy people from Chicago, from Detroit, from all across the United States would own islands. These were all the wealthy people that would, gentlemen that would own yachts, and they wanted a place to party at, up and around the Thousand Islands. So it was a playground for the rich.
Dean Georgeless, director of food and beverage at the Renaissance Blackstone Hotel in Chicago, and Blackstone history buff, elaborates.
So the Blackstone Hotel was built in 1910, and actually opened in 1910, and it was built in honor of Timothy Blackstone, who was the president of the Chicago Northern Railways, which ran right across from the plot of land we're at right now. And the reason why he was there was to ensure that the trains ran on time, because that's how the U.S. was connected to each other, was through the railway. So if Chicago was connected to New York through the railway, was connected to Ohio through the railway, it was connected throughout the rest of the country through the railway.
And the railway also connected the rest of the world to the Thousand Islands.
Mr. Blackstone, being the president of the Chicago Northern Railways, had a deal with Mr. Pullman, who was the president and CEO of Pullman Cars, which made train cars for the railways, not only in Chicago, but throughout the country.
George Pullman of Chicago, the inventor of the Pullman sleeping car, also dubbed the Palace Car, had several prominent customers, among them George Bolt and Mae Irwin. Mr. Pullman also owned a mansion in the Thousand Islands and was a neighbor to both his rich and famous friends. Mae Irwin would travel her troupe across the country performing shows at 2-week intervals, with stops in Boston, Chicago, and special summer stops in Clayton, New York. Karen Killian, noted expert in the life of Mae Irwin, explains.
She loved to entertain, and in the summertime, she would bring her theater groups up from New York City. They would stay at her home up here, and they would practice the plays and everything. And probably most of the cooking, a good portion, was done by her. Mae Irwin did a lot of traveling with her own theater production, and she would have had her own railroad car at a certain point in time, and would have gone across the United States, stopping in Chicago and other large cities, and performing on the West Coast also.
After her island rehearsals, Mae Irwin and her company would perform sold-out summer shows in the newly constructed Thousand Island Clayton Opera House, built in 1903 by George R. Kenyon, a Clayton resident, and the gentleman she would hire to build her island home while she stayed at the Herald House.
She was busy.
Actually, busy is an understatement for all the activities Miss Irwin was engaged in at the time. Russ Tarby, author, journalist, and editor of Jazz Fest magazine, adds more.
She was able to make a big splash in entertainment, which then, as now in many ways, was New York City. We do know that she made some records in 1907, and it's a great thing that she did, because now we can hear her voice, and she did have a very, almost a girlish kind of high voice. Recording of the Bully song, which was a coon song, actually rose into the top 10 of American popular songs in December of 1907. It's wonderful that we're able to hear the recordings. She made about 4 or 5 recordings in 1907 for Victor, and really do get a good feel for what she was doing. And even though the words of some of these coon songs are kind of offensive to our modern ears, you can see the way they're delivered is clearly in the concept of a caricature, a cartoon, making fun. It's ethnic humor. It's part of the fabric of American humor. It does turn out that coon songs and ragtime instrumental music, which was happening simultaneously, those two forms really combined to help create what we now know as jazz, which later spawned American popular music as we know it. I think she rose to the top because she had a particular presence. She had great stage presence, what we would call nowadays charisma. And she had it in spades. She would wear a corset, and she had this incredible figure, an hourglass figure, literally. She had an infectious smile and, like I said, a very girlish, fun-loving laugh.
Well, she had a lot of famous people that were in her life because of what she did. She had songs written for her by Irving Berlin. She co-wrote a song with Georgianne Cohan when I believe Georgianne Cohan was about 15 years old. Babe Ruth was a friend of hers who visited the Thousand Islands. George Bolt, who was at the time building Bolt Castle. The friendship with George Bolt may have been how the dressing got to New York City to the Waldorf Astoria and to his famous cook, Oscar. She had a number of people, mostly I think out of New York City, that were friends of hers.
She was uninhibited, let's put it that way. You could just tell from the kind of songs that she performed, also the kind of songs that she wrote. She wrote one song called Hot Tamale Alley, another coon song, and she wrote the words, and George M. Cohan wrote the music. There's no doubt that she was up there and part of the Thousand Island scene, so there's no doubt about that.
As a neighbor to George Bolt, both in the Thousand Islands and New York City, we asked Shane Sanford, curator of Bolt Castle, if Mae Irwin and Bolt's wife Louise would have attended the same social events.
I think Mrs. Bolt was certainly a kind and courteous lady, but she was probably almost the opposite of Mae Irwin. Mrs. Bolt was more the motherly person to her two children, George Jr. and her daughter, Louise Clover. Not to say that they weren't friends and didn't know each other. Certainly Mrs. Bolt was probably more a tamer character than Mae Irwin.
Miss Irwin also held massive parties at the Island Mansion, where she was not only the host, but the only woman guest. She cooked for the men, held boxing matches on the front lawn, and generally held court entertaining the entranced entourage.
Oh, she thought a lot of herself. She did.
She was rumbling with the boys.
She was obviously a very fun-loving person. She often commented that she liked men more than women and animals more than men or anyone. A number of years ago, I had been told by an older gentleman in Clayton that when she would come to town, she would often have a little squirrel perched on her shoulder as she came to town to do her shopping. So I still can't quite figure out how that could have happened.
In 1904, she published Mae Irwin's Home Cooking, a 268-page cookbook that showed the other side of the actress, her love of cooking, and her continued search for new recipes.
The thing that made it interesting was that it had recipes on the right-hand side of the page, and then her jokes and poems from vaudeville you were supposed to read as you were preparing food for your guests.
Mae Irwin also became a columnist for the Evening Journal, one of the prominent New York newspapers of the day.
I think I have around 21 cooking columns that she produced for the newspaper, and they must have had a really wonderful illustrator at the time. If it was tea for two or something, there'd be a picture of two women sitting at a table having tea that looks very kind of Art Nouveau.
And so it was that Mae Irwin was a frequent traveler and well-known celebrity across the entire country, but especially in New York, Clayton, and Chicago. And because of her interest in cooking and the fact that she was preparing a manuscript for her second cookbook, she always had a keen eye and interest in new recipes wherever she went.
I think the thing that most intrigues me about her for the time and place that she lived was that she was involved in so many different other things other than just the theater, and seeing her area of domestic was huge.
A lot of women performers, especially if they're gifted with a wonderful voice or whatever, and they're good looks, they get on stage and they do their thing and they make their money. But she really was a businesswoman in many ways.
Wherever Mae Irwin went, she was adored. From the Thousand Islands, where she owned property, to the major cities of Boston, Chicago, New York, where she performed on stage. She loved it. One of her favorite places was the Waldorf Astoria, where she would make a grand entrance, George Bolt's Hotel. The place to be and be seen at the Waldorf was Peacock Alley. It was akin to today's celebrity red carpet appearance.
Peacock Alley was a spacious corridor that was built between the Waldorf and the Astoria hotels after we merged in 1897. It became a popular viewing area where people of all walks of life would gather to watch the rich and famous. Matt Zolby, the Director of Sales and Marketing for the Waldorf Astoria in New York, explains.
Media in those days was not far-reaching. If one wanted to see what the rich of the day, the famous of the day were wearing and see what finery they had, you had to go and see it. So according to journalists of the day, the New York Herald was the newspaper of note, up to 5,000 people would come and line the corridor between the hotels, which separated or connected them, however you want to put it. This corridor became known as Peacock Alley based on a journalist's commentary. This journalist indicated that the rich and the famous would come and strut like peacocks.
And strut she did. Mae Irwin, dressed in her most flamboyant elegance and flashing her stunning smile, would make her way down Peacock Alley to her favorite restaurant in the hotel, where Oscar Turchke would greet her and escort her to the best seat in the house.
Oscar and Mae would have made a good pair to give Thousand Island Dressing its first major public appearance. She bringing him the recipe, and Oscar introducing it to the elite patrons at the Waldorf. Both Mae Irwin and Oscar were good marketers of themselves, establishing their names as brands, something commonplace among celebrities today. Mae and Oscar were experts at branding long before movies, TV, and radio. Oscar had a sauce bottled and distributed under his name with a label that had a picture of him on it. This was ambitious stuff at the time for a Mae to be at a hotel, no matter how prominent the hotel was. And Mae Irwin was one of the first women of film. She was a pioneer recording songs on vinyl. She had her own cookbook, and all this growing out of her career as a well-known stage actress.
Oscar Turchke was the first person to be hired by George Bolt to work at the Waldorf Hotel, even before it opened. Roger Lucas elaborates.
One of the first persons that George Bolt would hire for the Waldorf Hotel was Oscar Turchke. He was from Switzerland, came very much like George Bolt. A young man, and started in the restaurant business. He worked for Delmonico's in New York City, which was a very exclusive, high-end restaurant. And then when George Bolt found out about the services that Oscar provided for the many Wall Street clientele, he had Oscar Turchke hired as maitre d' on December 13th, 1893. So Oscar started and was George Bolt's right-hand man for 26 years.
Oscar was so key, elemental really, in projecting the Waldorf to fame across the nation.
The level of service offered by George Bolt and Oscar Turchke at the Waldorf Astoria was unmatched at the time.
George Bolt introduced the concept of the hotels we know today. He was very focused on a high level of service. We had tremendous staff counts at that time. Labor was fairly inexpensive, but the profile of employee that he wanted was a lady or a gentleman. He believed that we should have a scenario whereby it was ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen.
George Bolt had a following. These people would really find this to be the exquisite place to be. It was the in place to be at the Waldorf Hotel.
Oscar's fame was nationwide, and although he clearly stated he was not a chef, he did publish his own cookbook in 1896, and in 1900 marketed his own condiment, Oscar's Sauce, which won an honorable mention at the Paris Exposition that same year and was sold throughout the United States. It was advertised as the sauce that should be in the storeroom of every summer home and yacht, indispensable for fish, cold meats, and clam cocktails. Now, when Mae Irwin would dine at the Waldorf Astoria, she and Oscar had something more in common to discuss, since both were published cookbook authors. Did they also trade recipes? And when in this exchange might the recipe for Thousand Island dressing have been shared?
Thousand Island dressing is one of the items that Oscar created, among many others. George Bolt, on a trip when he had Oscar with him on a yacht, he had asked Oscar to create a sauce. And this was not dissimilar to some of the other endeavors that George had him work on. Oscar was a tinkerer in the kitchen. He wasn't a chef by trade, but he was interested in creating new and varied tastes.
But the legend persists that it was Oscar who created the salad dressing on board George Bolt's yacht.
Now, it is said that during a Sunday afternoon cruise in one of George Bolt's many steam yachts, as the chef was preparing their lunch for them, he realized he ran out of particular type of salad dressing that he would normally serve Mr. Bolt. Using ingredients on hand and on board the vessel, he developed what became known as Thousand Island dressing. Served it to Mr. Bolt and the party aboard the vessel, and they all very much liked it, were pleased with it, and it really caught on and began serving it in his hotels in New York City.
George Bolt was out on the Thousand Islands River with his wife Louise on their yacht, the Louise, and he had asked the steward aboard to create a dish in honor of the beauty of the area. And that steward actually rose to international fame as Oscar of the Waldorf Astoria, and that's George Bolt's business.
Roger Lucas, who has studied the life of George Bolt since 1977, voices his opinion.
Oscar Tursky was a very wealthy man in his own right, so to be a chef aboard a boat for George Bolt, I highly doubt if Oscar was even at the Thousand Islands.
In the 1890s, Oscar bought a farm in New Paltz, which at the time offered quiet countryside living between New York City and Albany. He built a mansion there and went there to relax from his duties at the Waldorf. So Oscar had his own retreat, just as George Bolt had the Thousand Islands as his playground. So Oscar had no reason to tag along with George on his breaks from the Waldorf. In fact, one of the men was almost always at the hotel when the other wasn't. They didn't travel together, and Oscar clearly preferred driving.
To live at the Thousand Islands, you need a boat. And to live, in particular, if you live on an island, you need a boat. But one boat wasn't enough for George Bolt. He had a fleet of boats. And then to entertain friends, he bought a series of boats, one of which was the Louise. And it was aboard that boat that legend has it, the Thousand Island dressing was created. Chef aboard that boat, we are uncertain about that one person's name. Legend has it that he went on to become Oscar Tursky, maitre d' of the Waldorf Hotel. It is of my opinion that that person was not Oscar Tursky. What we have is a picture of the Louise with a chef aboard it, which to me speaks 1,000 words. He was not Oscar Tursky aboard that boat.
But where did the story of Oscar being on the boat get its start? Alan Bennis of the Thousand Islands Inn offers his opinion.
It's an interesting story, and it was created for a very good purpose. And they were trying to come up with something to promote the region that would have some national appeal. So they came up with the story that Shane told you. They ended up giving it to the tour boat lines and asked the owners of the tour boat lines if they would encourage the announcers on the tour boats, of which there were dozens around here at that time, in hopes that it would tie the dressing in with the region. If people liked it, went home and sitting at home, and in the wintertime they had Thousand Islands dressing, they think about the Thousand Islands.
The tour boat guys in that, God bless them for the work they did, after a day's work in that, they would go to the local pubs and they would enjoy a day telling stories of what they've told the various tourists that took rides on the tour boats. They would fabricate stories. They would get tired of telling the same old story day after day after day, so they would come up with little jokes and lines and stuff and that.
I also worked on tour boats from 1960 to 1970. Told the very same story because not only did nobody know any different, nobody cared.
One of the other stories they tell is that if you fall in Canadian water, you won't get wet because it's Canadian dry.
So when Susan and I bought the Thousand Islands Inn in 1972, it wasn't until the late 1980s that we were made aware of the real story.
Mae Irwin expert Karen Killian believes the real story is that Mae was the link between the dressing's creation in the Thousand Islands and how it appeared at the Waldorf Astoria.
She often took her guests for shore dinners. And a shore dinner meant that everybody went in St. Lawrence skiffs and fished. And when they caught enough fish, they would pull the skiffs up to the shoreline, and their fishing guide would have brought all of the implements and everything to cook with and to eat with.
Captain Alan Bettis explains more about shore dining as guest on the Thousand Islands TV show A Great Day Outdoors.
Morning's coming, sun is rising. Join us now, no compromising. Time to get going. A great day outdoors.
Before boats had motors in them, the party would start out with their guides and their St. Lawrence skiff and roll around and fish. And back then you could put a shore dinner on just about any island you pulled up to. But now, of course, it's grown up with population, so we have certain areas where we do it. Then it starts out with fat back, which is fat off the back of a pig. And you render that down, get your grease for the rest of the dinner. Then you eat the fat back, it's like chitlins, on a piece of bread with some sliced onion. And then you take the fish that you caught and fry that in fat back grease. And in the meantime, you're making potatoes, corn on the cob. You have a tossed salad with Thousand Island dressing, of course. Thousand Island dressing had its origin with the shore dinner. It was created by the white fishing guide. Then after you're done with all that, the dessert is French toast, which is also deep fried in the fat back grease. Unlike your pan-fried French toast that you have at home, this puffs right up. It's just like French pastry. Then you finish that off with guide's coffee, which is just before the coffee grounds right into the boiling water. Let it set for about 30 minutes, and then the grounds all settle at the bottom of the pot. Then you drink the coffee, and that keeps you awake for the ride home.
Mae Irwin was always on the lookout for new recipes, even in the most unusual places.
She noticed that the guide that she used most frequently had a special salad dressing that his wife had prepared for him. And so she asked to have a taste of it, loved it, and said, could I get the recipe?
At this time, Mae was staying at the Herald House in between her show business commitments, while her mansion was being built on nearby Grindstone Island. Jim Bertrand, whose family owned the hotel, remembers.
My grandfather built the Herald House in 1893. Mae Irwin, the celebrated Broadway actress at that time, was a very, very good friend. In fact, such a good friend that she would stay at the hotel at odd and various times. A very huge talent. In fact, was the Belle of Broadway during the whole time that she was in play. And I can easily see her sitting in that dining room. Sophia alone not only made it, that she was the creator of the dressing. She made it for her husband, who was a guide. The Bertrand family was the first ones to serve it commercially in a commercial dining room at that time. So the fact that Mae Irwin, being a nationally known, in fact internationally known star, would have circulated that recipe around, okay, doesn't shock me a bit. I can see that coming a mile away.
If someone else created something similar, I would believe that could have happened, obviously, with people, experimenting with recipes and so forth. But I honestly do believe that she got the recipe from her fishing guide and did, as a favor, give it to George Bolt because he had a very big hotel with a big restaurant.
Where it went after that and how it went after that, I don't know.
If indeed Mae Irwin did bring the recipe to Oscar, we decided to look for the evidence. Cornell University houses 15,000 menus that made up the the personal collection of Oscar Turchke in the school's Division of Rare Books and Manuscripts. Senior Reference Coordinator Hilary Dorch-Wong elaborates.
This is the permanent home of Oscar Shirky's materials, including his menu collection and his collection of scrapbooks and memorabilia. This collection has a lot of historical value, in part because of Oscar Shirky's prominence and the prominence of his position as maitre d' of the Waldorf Astoria for so many years. It has all sorts of information that can tell scholars today what people ate, what people valued in a restaurant experience at that time, what it meant to eat at one of the finest hotel restaurants in New York City at that time.
What the menu collection doesn't have is any reference to Thousand Island dressing on any Waldorf Astoria menu. In fact, there's not even one restaurant menu housed in Oscar's extensive collection during the time period from 1895 to 1912 that has any mention of Thousand Island dressing whatsoever.
That's really not unusual. The restaurant practice at that time was not to name the different dressings and sauces available on the menu, but to have the waiter describe the choices. Therefore, you will see listings of greens and types of salads. Obviously, Waldorf salad was a big one at Oscar's restaurant. But nothing about the sauces or dressings available was printed on the menu. A new recipe would have been personally recommended by the waiter and described in great detail. And remember, the dressing may not have been named Thousand Island dressing yet.
So what physical evidence is there to support the claim that the origin of Thousand Island dressing is the Thousand Islands? Or is the Theo Rooms claim correct and the dressing was created in Chicago? Mae Irwin once again enters the stage. During the time period when she was building her mansion on the island, she renamed Irwin Island.
Then in 1906, she had a brand new house erected, and it was a 3-story turret mansion. She had a bowling alley. There was a grand staircase that went up to the 2nd floor. And when you got to the landing, there was a 7 by 5 foot stained glass window of Mae Irwin as Miss Liberty, done by Tiffany and Company in New York City. And it was actually very outrageous for the time. It was considered outrageous.
However, as 1906 became 1907, Mr. George R. Kenyon, the builder Mae had hired to create the mansion, was not completing the work quickly enough for her satisfaction. One Tuesday evening, Mae wrote a letter that showed up in the archives of the Kenyon family. It gives us a clue as to how direct she was when she wanted something done. This is what the letter said.
My dear Mr. Kenyon, enclosed is a list of the things I'm waiting for you to do for me, and if you can't do them, or send a man or two for the work, please let me know at once, as I can't be delayed any longer, as I can't live in the house until these things, or some of them, are done, and it is only fair that you should let me know what you intend to do. Yours sincerely, Mae Irwin.
By October 7, 1907, it appears all was right between Builder Kenyon and his famous customer. In another letter written to Mr. Kenyon, obviously penned while she was on tour in Pittsburgh and staying at the Fort Pitt Hotel, she proved once again what a good businesswoman she was. She describes to George how she was forcing another contractor on the project to be responsible for his own workers and therefore stay on schedule, since it was costing him for the labor and not her.
You see, as long as he is paying his men, he won't want them there any longer than is necessary.
And she also offered an apology of sorts to George for all she acknowledged she put him through.
Hoping you and yours are well, and again thanking you for all the annoyance and trouble I've been to you. I am yours sincerely, Mae Irwin.
She also offered to lend him her boathouse for the winter.
You may leave your boat just the same in my boathouse as long as you like.
And of the same Fort Pitt stationery, she enclosed a note to his wife, Edna, which contained a recipe Edna might have requested. The recipe was for Sophia sauce, and for those familiar today with the ingredients, it is clear that this is the recipe for Thousand Island dressing. In addition, Mae adds a note that Edna can sample the sauce at the Herald House and at Bolt's Hotel in New York City.
The fact that this document exists, dated 1907, shows several things. One, it confirms Mae Irwin was freely sharing Sophia Lalonde's recipe with anyone who expressed an interest, even the wife of the builder constructing her new island home. It's not difficult to imagine Mae Irwin giving the recipe to George Bolt and Oscar for presentation at the Waldorf, one of her favorite places. 2. It also shows as of 1907, Sophia's sauce was the name in use, so no one had yet named the recipe Thousand Island dressing. 3. It shows it was being served at both the Herald House and the Waldorf Astoria at that time. This is important documentation.
Jerome Lalonde, grandson of Sophia, remembers his grandmother's kitchen.
She was a wonderful grandmother. She was a great cook. She had a coal-fired, wood-fired stove in her kitchen that always had a fresh baked pie in it. When you walked into the kitchen, you got this wonderful aroma of fruit pie in the oven. We had Grandma's dressing on the table from the time I remember eating a salad. And I can't tell you exactly how old I was, but I was the youngest of 6 children in our family. So the dressing had been on our table for a long, long time. We always called it Grandma's dressing. We never called it Thousand Island dressing.
When Mae Irwin wrote the letter to George Kenyon and enclosed the recipe for his wife, Edna, that fateful Monday morning, she was performing in Pittsburgh for the week, and then scheduled to leave for Chicago that next Saturday, October 12, 1907. Her next stop, the luxurious Auditorium Hotel. The Auditorium Hotel opened in 1893 to accommodate the throngs of visitors to the World Exposition in Chicago. The luxury hotel featured the finest in dining and accommodations, and also another highlight that Miss Irwin particularly adored, a passageway that connected to a theater complex where Mae Irwin and her company played their rollicking show for a 2-week run. The corridor was named Chicago's Peacock Alley because of the crowds of people that gathered to see the stars of the day. And no star shined brighter than Mae Irwin. It must have been a thrill to see her well-practiced promenade as she paraded to the theater and smiled and waved to her adoring fans. Tucked in the back of the kitchen was a young man training as chef de garde-manger at the Auditorium restaurant, Mr. Theo Rooms, as seen here in a staff photograph. The same Chicago chef who later claimed in 1925 that he was the creator of Thousand Island dressing was in training as the garde-manger for the Auditorium restaurant located in the same hotel where Mae Irwin was staying in October 1907.
The garde-manger is considered to be the most demanding workstation in any restaurant kitchen. They need to be able to apply proper seasoning to food that is to be served cold. Many chefs have lots of ability to serve hot food well, but cold food offers unique challenges. This includes balancing the flavor and textures of salad greens with the flavors and textures of the sauces, oils, and vinegar used to top them. What better person to tell about a new salad dressing recipe?
Only a week before, Mae Irwin sent a copy of the recipe for Sophia's sauce to Edna Kenyon of Clayton, New York. Is it too far-fetched to guess that she would have eagerly shared the same recipe with a handsome young man she spotted in the hotel's dining room as he struggled to learn the proper sauces, seasonings, and oils for salad greens in his quest to be chef garde-manger? In the 2 weeks Mae stayed at the hotel, might they have developed a friendship that inspired him to try some new recipes from the celebrated cookbook author? 6 years passed. Now a handsome woman in her 50s, as the second decade of the new century was beginning, Mae was as busy as ever. In 1913, she starred in 88 performances of Widow by Proxy on Broadway, and then toured the country with her troupe performing a revival of her popular show, Mrs. Peckham's Carouse. One of Mae's 2-week stops in 1913 was one of Chicago's newer luxury hotels, the Blackstone. Hired as the Blackstone chef garde-manger for the hotel's gala opening in 1910, Theo Rooms had introduced a new creation he called Blackstone Salad. It had become so popular by 1913, mainly because of the unique salad dressing that topped the greens, that patrons and chefs from other hotels were asking its name and for the recipe. Chef Rooms knew that calling it Blackstone dressing would limit its popularity.
In the early years of the Blackstone Hotel, There was a theater that was situated right next to it called the Blackstone Theater, and the two buildings were actually connected by a pedestrian pedway that connected the kitchen on top of the theater to the banquet space in the hotel.
Did Mae Irwin run into her old friend Chef Rooms in the Blackstone kitchen above the Blackstone Theater? Did he tell her his dilemma trying to name the dressing? Did she tell him the story of the origin of Sophia's sauce and that it was from the Thousand Islands region of New York? That she had shared it with the famous maitre d', Oscar of the Waldorf, a decade before? It's interesting because all those elements made their way into the Theo Rooms story. The Thousand Islands area inspiration, the maitre d' in a hotel. Is it all coincidence?
If Mae Irwin gave Theo Rooms the Sophia sauce recipe in 1907, and if he used it as the basis for his Blackstone dressing in 1910, and if in 1913, when other chefs in Chicago were looking for the recipe for Blackstone dressing because of the rave reviews circulating, did Mae Irwin once again play a part?
With the Blackstone Hotel kitchen above the Blackstone Theater and connected by a corridor to the hotel, it's easy to picture Mae Irwin after a performance going to the kitchen above the stage and chatting it up with Chef Theo about his now popular recipe, sharing the origin of Sophia's sauce with him and how the dressing was from the Thousand Islands and found favor with the maitre d' at the Waldorf Astoria, and then strutting as she did at Peacock Alley over to her room at the Blackstone Hotel. She exits the stage, not realizing she had influenced culinary history for all time.
After Mae Irwin's stay at the Blackstone Hotel by late 1913, the recipe for Thousand Island dressing began appearing in the Chicago Tribune's cooking section, the first published accounts of the recipe in the press. By 1925, Chef Theo Rooms was formally recognized for his creation of Thousand Island dressing at a ceremony by the Chefs of Cuisine inaugural meeting. Since then, Thousand Island dressing has gone from national and even international fame.
At our hotel, we get unusual requests because our guests know we're the home of Thousand Island dressing. They'll request it on their salad and their sandwiches, and we're happy to serve it. We serve around 50,000 guests a year here at the Renaissance Blackstone.
Well, the Thousand Island dressing is what I like on my salads. And I'm not a connoisseur of good taste, but what Bolt provided using that Thousand Island dressing in his hotels, the Bellevue, Stratford, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, people became enjoying that. I think just the popularity of the Thousand Islands, the Waldorf Astoria, the popularity of the dressing, the Thousand Island dressing, and people like it. It's just, it sells itself.
It's an amazing product. I myself, I use it on everything. Not just on salads. I put it on French fries. I put it on a lot of my different sandwiches and even on my entrees sometimes.
It has been all over the world. Actually, as of right now, we have some delegates from Ontario that are visiting China and are bringing the dressing as a gift.
Thousand Islands dressing is probably better known than Thousand Islands place. A lot of people are surprised to find there's a place called the Thousand Islands that they know from the Thousand Island dressing. A few years ago, a Japanese morning TV showed up at Bill Castle wanting to do a special on Thousand Island dressing. It turns out it's very popular in Japan, so the fame of Thousand Islands through its dressing is spread worldwide.
All this from the recipe of a hard-working St. Lawrence River fishing guide's wife, helped along the way by the enthusiasm and good taste of one of the biggest stars and personalities of her day, Mae Irwin, and playing supporting roles, the rich and famous George Bolt, who so loved his wife, he built a castle for her in one of the most breathtaking regions of the world, only to lose her to an untimely death before its completion. The hospitality marketing genius and connoisseur Oscar of the Waldorf, who took a simple hotel service position and elevated himself to worldwide fame. The cooks at the Herald House in Clayton, New York, who knew a good recipe when they tasted it, and shared it first in a restaurant setting. The Chicago chef in training, who added his own ingredients and contributed a name we now associate with the recipe of the fishing guide's wife. And every one of us who has ever sampled a delicious salad, burger, or other cuisine topped with Thousand Island dressing.
For a DVD copy of The Mysterious Origin of Thousand Island Dressing, visit wcny.org/Thousand Island.
I've never heard any legends of any dressing whatsoever.
And Chef Oscar and came up to the Thousand Islands too. And on one of the boats, one of his yachts, they had to concoct a dressing, and that was it.
I did know originated here, but I don't know if it's because she ran out of Italian.
I just thought it was named that because of all the little particles in it, just kind of like the Thousand Islands itself.
I like number C. It was bolder, had much more flavor. The others were a little windy.
Wow, definitely puts a pucker in your face.
People from all around the world come and buy it from other countries, and then they realize it's from here and they get all excited. They like don't make the connection.
It's the only dressing I put on my salads.
That's pretty interesting.
That's it. So.
Any questions?
I've seen like Russian dressing offered as like the same as Thousand Island dressing.
It is very close. Yeah, in fact, there was some theories that some of the large boats and so forth, freighters that come through, that Russian populace, would man them, and then when they stopped, sample it and stole it. But yeah, it's very similar.
So we actually found the Soapy sauce recipe at Thousand Islands Museum in the file cabinet. In a letter from someone who had dropped off a bunch of Mae Irwin's letters, and it was stuffed in a letter like you saw there in an envelope, just laid.
Well, actually, the gentleman that built the Opera House and also was building her island home, it was his family that gave the archive of letters to the museum, and we just happened to find it.
We did.
at the very last moment. So it's amazing actually that we could do that, because a lot of, you can say where you think it leads, but until you have something definitive like that. Yes.
This is one of the documentary. Have you considered submitting it to any one of the historical journals? That's serious historical investigation. I'm sure one of the journals would take it.
Yeah, if you have some names.
Sure. Absolutely.
Well, first of all, my name's Carol Youngs, and my family's been up here since like the 20s. And I really like to see old recipe books.
Yeah.
I don't know, have you found any?
Well, actually, there was Oscar's cookbook that was published in 1896, and we went through that with a fine-tooth comb.
And you didn't mention it.
There's no Thousand Islands dressing. There's Russian salad, right? And we checked to see what that dressing was. It was a totally different recipe.
But the ones, and I think I know there's a couple that if these books were printed maybe in the 20s, 30s, or 40s, they were promoting the Oscar version, and I think that's why so many people have the Oscar version, even though it may actually be a lot. And coincidentally, because I also work at the Antique Boat Museum, in 2018, the younger Bolt family came in, and I heard them talking, and I went to them and I said, well, what do you think about the Thousand Island Dressing? Now, oh, it's Oscar, it's definitely Oscar. Making up all these other recipes. No, just as you can see, the man who was talking about it, they're fine about.
Well, actually, we were told we were going to take the boat tour yesterday, because it actually started with that 11 years ago. And this was first broadcast 10 years ago, so it's kind of interesting. We're here for the 150th at the plate at the same time. But what was the train of thought?
That we were going to take the boat tour.
Oh yeah, because we were told the story's changed.
It has changed.
That they're now talking and saying that it was Sophia, I guess is actually how her name is.
That's interesting.
Yes.
So,
we can't verify it because we did not take the tour yesterday.
Yeah, but we did hear that from.
This is her granddaughter, right?
Yeah, that's what I wanted.
Or the great grandchildren. This is her granddaughter with great grandchildren.
Your grandmother?
Yeah.
So when I was playing tennis with her, she's being real humble. She ran our tennis group, and she told my little son Nate, because we lived in A Bay, that her grandmother had the original $1,000 dressing. So that's why I knew when she walked in late, I thought, oh, let's see what they all say.
I think there's. Are you folks in the back from the Milan family?
Because you were nodding when it came to Sophia and the...
Well, I just nod. I'm a Longton, okay? But my grandmother was a Lalonde, and my dad always talked about this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And so you don't pay attention when you're a kid too much. I grew up part in Clayton, and big chunk, and I knew Laurel, and I knew Jerome, and I swam with Jerome and off my grandma's dock and all that kind of stuff. But it was a no-brainer to him. He said, it was this Aunt Sophia, and that's it.
Right.
My grandmother, my grandmother knew everybody. Her name was Emma Lalonde, and she knew all sorts of people. I mean, it was amazing. And I've been doing ancestry stuff since. And I believe I met her, before she died in 1950 or 59. I think I met her, but kid. It's been really.
Well, the thing that we did find, because reading the back of the menu where Alan had the story, okay, so we pinned Alan down. And we were told that he had the piece of paper with the recipe.
He never showed it to us.
And he never showed it to us. And when he opened the safe, so we're like, okay, we're here. We're going to have you open a safe, pull out that recipe, right? He did, okay. But the thing is that what had filtered down from the cooks, what had filtered down from the Lalondes, from the people that were involved with this prior to he and Sue buying the restaurant in 1972. That story, even though he may have embellished it or hoped that it was all true and so forth, had enough of a ring of truth to it that as we followed the path, you can see how everything is intertwined here. it's a little bit of all of this, all the different legends that work. But you know, it seems to go back to that simple recipe that Sophia created, and you know,
spread around.
And then it spread around. So anyway,
She was very sensitive. Sophia was seeing, from what I could tell, Sophia, that she didn't mind giving it away to anybody, just like the way the famous actress did giving it away. Well, she gave it away to people in Clinton. She gave it away to anybody who wanted it.
yeah, I mean,
So
she wasn't thinking of making her own Grandma Brown beans or something.
Was there any effort in any of this history to trademark the Thousand Island dressing name? Did, you know, either Oscar or...
Well, we had two questions on that. One was, why is it Thousand Island dressing and not islands? Okay, and we thought that was because Kraft came out with it first, and that they were attempting to copyright it. They never did. So you'll see, and I'm not sure if they were refused or what the reason was. We've never, and I think the interpretation of having to be Thousand Island dressing when it was named in Chicago, if you follow, you know, how the story goes, they were still fairly unfamiliar with the region. And I think they just chopped it off, and that became the name. And so, yeah, that's murky. We don't really know.
Any other questions?
Well, I think you did a fantastic job.
Thank you.
Yeah, you said it best. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful job, professional video presentation. Here's a certificate of appreciation on behalf of the they'll stick around if you got any one-on-one questions. Yeah. Thank you for coming today. We really appreciate it.
We do have a few DVDs that you have a DVD player still.